Well, everybody, this is exciting because we don't often get to do two parts with our guests, but I'm excited because pricing is such an important topic for farmers, for florists, for everyone. And we definitely want our farmers to become more sustainable so that way they can continue to grow amazing flowers for us. So, Kimby, welcome back. And Amelia, welcome to the Flower Podcast.
Thank you, Scott.
So it's pricing is the number one topic I think all the time. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. And I know last year was a big year for rooted farmers. I know we talked to lots of people that were using rooted to do collectives or to, build more of a community of flower farms in an area. And I know there's a lot of big things that have kind of happened this year. Why don't we maybe we should start here. Maybe if you could just kind of give us an update briefly on what is new and rooted farmers and what's going on.
Well, we did have a big year. It was really exciting, and I think Kimby was a big part of that. I think one of the big changes that we saw coming out of COVID, I think was just this desire for community and connection, and kind of coming back together, but approaching our businesses in a more sustainable way, in a way that allowed us to continue growing, but to have some balance in how we were growing. And that desire sort of led to this groundswell of, collectives and hubs and exchanges and groups of growers who are working together toward this shared mission. And they're all coming at it from different places, bringing different perspectives to their project, to their goal, to their mission. And they're all approaching it in slightly different models. And now we're working with folks across the country. And that's a really exciting thing to see and to be partnering with them on, and has led to great feedback on how Rooted works and what we should be focusing on as we're continuing to grow and to build new features. And so that was a big piece of our fall and winter building, was to really look at what are people asking for, what do we have the bandwidth to take on and to tackle, and how can we help to solve some of the problems that folks in this space are working through, and kind of add a productive voice to the conversation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think so many times as it's so funny. It's like when people start growing flowers, a lot of times it's because of their passion for flowers. They love farming, they love growing, they love being outdoors. They think about all the amazing things that they see, and oh, I could do that, and they get all excited. And then there's the marketing side. There's the side like, oh, now I need to sell these things, and and it's not like they don't think about it, but it's almost sometimes I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like sometimes this ends up on the back burner because it's sometimes the hard thing to do. It's sometimes the out of your comfort zone thing to do. And so having to, knock on doors or call people or solicit business from your, like with Kimby, with your CSAs and things like that, it sometimes feels unnatural or out of your comfort zone. And so having something like Rooted, I think, to really help that process is so amazing. I,
Well,
I just
so
think it's great.
it's hard, right? Because we're all the any entrepreneur, any small business owner needs to wear all of the hats. Like, you can't just say, that's not my department. I'm not going to do the marketing.
Which,
That's
by the way, I love your hat. I have to say this.
You like my
If you're on
hat?
YouTube, yes, it says flower buckets are my love language.
I
So, yes,
I'm
we
gonna
have.
give credit to Justine McFarland at River City. She designed these with Jill Shea up in Connecticut, and they put these together. And so these are fun. So we'll get you in Kimby hats.
Anyway, sorry I didn't mean to interrupt. So,
Yeah. But no, I mean, I think the need to wear all the hats is really challenging for any small business owner, but especially a farmer, where there's just such a like difference of the types of roles that we're having to work through on a daily basis. And you're having to crop plan, and you're having to really think about business development and marketing and pricing, and being able to do all of these things while
Right.
you're also maybe working an off farm job or raising your kids or doing who knows what. You have to be an expert in social media and sales, and also deliver all your flowers and all of these things that really are taxing, and it's super hard to do everything well. And so that's where we try to add a little bit of support and come in and say, we've got you. We've got these things that we can help with. So trying to take some of the load off there.
Sure. Well, Kimby, I wanted to ask you in our part one, but then I didn't think about it till just now. I was curious. So, how long have you been using Rooted?
Hmm. Um, just started last year.
Okay, so it's
So
part of the collective.
I actually joined right before we started the collective. I figured we were talking about Rooted as a group, and I was like, oh, that looks like a really great option.
Hmm.
And so I joined Rooted, and then as a collective, we're like, oh, wait, now we're doing a collective, so now we're also joining Rooted for that. So I probably sold as independently as just myself through Rooted for maybe 2 months, maybe, and then it was mostly through collective stuff.
Okay. So I'm curious how that works. So with collectives, does everybody on one page with the different farms broken down, or does each individual farm have like their own platform, and then just like the deliveries and the costs and things are connected?
So
Yeah.
from the farm's perspective, each farm has their own profile. So you're logging in, you're adding all of your inventory, you're managing it the same way you would any kind of e-commerce store, in the sense that you have your own access point. The difference is that we're set up for farm product. That's what we
Right.
do. Is we are built to specifically deal with perishable product and flowers, and the types of things that we're selling as growers. Um, so from a farm's perspective, they only have their own product that they're worrying about. And then the collective manager or managers in Kimby's situation, they have a few. They have access to everybody's product, and that is then aggregated and shared with all of their buyers, who all see one list across all of their producers.
Oh, okay. So that makes sense. So Kimby, as you guys used it with the collective, I mean, did you feel like, I know we talked about pricing earlier as far as trying to navigate what to charge for things. And of course you brought in the most years of growing is what I think you said earlier, which is good. But I mean, also having your vegetable backgrounds, it adds a little different element to it. I'm curious, how did you find this new platform really like helped you?
Yeah. So and this what I started doing, because I'm growing a lot of vegetables, I'm managing a lot of CSA and vegetable things, and then I'm also doing all the flowers. And so um, for my sanity and simplicity, I basically charged the same amount of money per stem for flowers, as far as pretty much everything I grew was $1. There's a couple exceptions, ranunculus were more expensive, sunflowers were more expensive. I had a couple $1.25s and $1.50s, but and then peonies were like 3 or something. I don't know what they were at the time, but so but just for my simplicity, all of the things were really simple and large, 25-cent differences. No, I didn't do 10-cent things, or $1.12 or anything like that. It was too much to keep track of all the vegetable prices and all the flower prices in my head. So I didn't do that. And then joining with Rooted and doing the flower exchange enabled me to kind of start charging more for certain flowers. So for example, like straw flower, I sold
Hmm.
them for $1. straight across. But then like in our market, everybody really likes straw flowers around here. So we started doing them for $1.10. And I would have never done them for $1.10 because it's just too much. So but it allowed me to kind of like start pushing prices just a little bit, going, oh wait, we're all doing this, like we're doing, you know, zinnias for $1.25 or $1.50. I don't remember what we did zinnias for, to be honest, but $1.15 or whatever it was. You know, and I can get away with that, and I can do that, and I don't have to keep track of I'm doing that for $1.15 because it's all in rooted and it's all like being processed through that, so I don't have to keep track of all those little cents. So it enabled me to make more money selling the same thing without having to do more work. So it's great.
Right, because then you're able to add that dime or whatever, and you don't realize how much that adds up when you're dealing with thousands of stems, and 11.50 for a zinnia doesn't seem bad at all, really. I mean, when you're talking about selling, wholesale, so that seems pretty decent. Yeah, I'm kind of curious though, and you can both chime in on this. You know, every farm has different overhead, right? Your land might cost different. Your plastic, you may have more hoop houses. Like you, Kurt, Kimby had a lot of feet under plastic. I think we were talking earlier, and and that all adds up in the cost. So not all flowers might cost the same for all growers to grow, and people need to know what is it, and it's so hard to sometimes and painful, but it's important to know what it costs you to grow something sometimes, well, all the time, so that way you're making money, right? So how does that work within the collective, maybe, and then maybe Amelia with Rooted? I don't know, whoever wants to go first, but I'm just kind of curious, how does that kind of take into account?
I think we as farmers tend to be pretty terrible about tracking our cost inputs. I've met very few farmers who do that reliably across any of their crops, let alone all of them. I think that's it's hard too, because there's so many. I mean, if you're looking at seeding and then transplanting or bumping up, if you're in kind of soil blocks, and then you're moving stuff outside, and maybe you're like, there are so many hours of labor that we don't track. And that's across the board. So I think it's really hard to measure inputs, not to say that we shouldn't be. I think what we tend to see more is the tracking of relative inputs. So tulips are more work for me than my zinnias are. And I'm going to be getting a lot more, they're just cut and come again. I'm going to be getting a lot more zinnias out of the same number of bed feet than I am tulips generally. And so I, like, relative to each other, I know that I'm going to be making a higher margin on my zinnias than I am on my tulips. So I think that we're starting to see, but I'll let Kimby step in, because maybe you're better than all of us at tracking.
No, no, not at all. Yeah. I mean, and this is even true on the vegetable end of things, as far as, there's a lot of crop budgets and stuff like that out there that that you can kind of guess and make educated guesses, or not so educated guesses sometimes, about what you think something is costing. And we've actually tried tracking hours of things, and we end up with, like, we have sheets and sheets of data that we've done absolutely nothing with, because it's really complicated and everybody did it differently. And so now it's like, well, I don't even know what that means. So we actually kind of like tried tracking our hours for a week, and it failed. But so I don't really look at it that way so much. More kind of, is it growing in a hoop house, or is it out in the field? Those are kind of bigger questions for value or price. And so then it's like, okay, is it pulling its weight? If it's in a plastic structure, is it pulling its weight? Like, and for me, I can go, okay, well, compared to a head of lettuce or compared to a tomato, or we can kind of look at it that way as well. And then I also look at, like, well, what do I like to harvest? because harvesting is a lot of your labor. So your time. And so then it's kind of like, okay, well, what do I like to harvest? What am I good at harvesting? What am I
Right.
good at growing? And then, for me, it's like, okay, well, the things that I don't like or I'm not good at growing, then I don't even offer those. Like they're not really I don't have to worry about what their price should be because I'm like, I'm awful at that. So I'm not going to do it. It's a waste of my time.
Right. And even under plastic though, if you've got a situation where um you have heat, you're heating a do you have a greenhouse, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. We have a one structure that is, it's got propane and a wood furnace.
So, I mean, there's an expense there too, and you're right though. I mean, and it's kind of like it's fun or not fun to talk about all this, but when it comes right down to it, it's like, well, what does your market bear? How, so you can't sell that bunch of zinnias for $35 because if you were to put every bit of time and equipment into it, yeah, it might not work. But hopefully, over the course of multiple years and multiple crops, as that overhead expenditures hopefully works out. Um,
And I think that's pretty typical for most farms, is to say, how can I maximize the production out of these beds so that I can kind of inch that number up higher and higher every year, knowing that I have a lot of fixed costs. These are costs that are just not going anywhere. I need to
sure.
cover those. And I have minimal labor hours that I need to cover for employees and things. And so how do I make sure that I'm covering that and then trying to maximize my production? And then once I've maximized my production, or as I'm building toward that, how do I optimize my pricing so that I'm making as much as I can off of every given stem that comes out of my field? Because that's another place where I think we see a lot of people struggling, and I know you see it too, Scott. Is just the discussions that growers are having constantly around, how do I price this? What feels like a fair price? What is the right price for this particular item? And so trying to optimize that, trying to get the right price, not way too high or way too low. If you price it way too high, it doesn't matter how great it's going to be. Like nobody's going to buy it. If you price your tulips at $10 a stem, that's not the right price.
Right.
it's it's also important not to price way too low, because then you're undercutting the folks around you, and you're also just not getting the value for what you're growing. So it's really just sort of bringing all of the pieces of the puzzle together to try to work yourself toward a more profitable operation.
So, Kimby, I know that this is probably an unfair question. I'm catching you off guard, but you're probably used to me by now doing that. So, I'm curious. Do you feel like, since you've been part of the collective and you're using Rooted now and you're capturing those dimes and quarters and things like that per stem over the course of a year now, or almost a year, do you feel like I mean, I don't know, is there a percentage maybe you feel like you've been able to become more profitable? I guess I'm trying to say, like, like, I know you're making that grimace face, so for those of you in podcast land, she's cringing. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, do you think like maybe you added 10% to the value of your product, maybe at least, or maybe more, trying, especially working with the other growers, where you're now all working in collaboration, trying to to have a unified front maybe.
Yeah, I would say I think 10% is probably fair. I'm trying to think about the things that I changed pricing on, and I think that's probably a fair number. And that's one thing that we try and do in our collective as well, is like, we're not necessarily all the same price, because stem length is a big deal.
Hmm.
Just and even with things that I've done, I'll actually list a product two different ways if I have different stem length. Like anemones is a really big one. It's like, sometimes I've got really gorgeous long stems, and so I'm going to charge differently, and I'm going to list that as a different product, then I have like sometimes I have little short guys that are, anemones start short. And so those little guys are cute too, but they're not really worth the same amount. And so we do have a little bit of flexibility within our pricing in the collective as well. So based on stem length, based on experience, based on what we think we can get or what we want to get. And kind of what you alluded to earlier, Scott, too, is like, well, that costs me a lot more to grow that, or whatever. I value that as a farmer more. So I'm going to charge a little bit more. And sometimes we get away with that. And I know our admins will kind of keep a watch on our prices and make sure that they're not like too crazy. So if somebody's charging something really, really high, they'll say, hey, that maybe is too high. What do you think about this? Or if somebody's really low, then they'll bump them up.
Right, because I'm sure
or
they're
talk to
getting
them about it.
feedback. Yeah, I'm sure they're getting feedback on that. But I just want everybody out there in the world of listening to the podcast to know that that is actually a normal operating practice to charge less for the shorter stems and the longer, because then you get the most money for the best product. And a lot of times, I mean, like when I get something, I'm trying to think of I'm gonna, there are, obviously we all know I have imported flowers before. So when you're buying them from another country, I mean, I'm not paying the same thing for a 35 centimeter ranunculus as I am a 50 centimeter ranunculus. I'm not paying the same thing. Number one, you can get more in a box for shipping purposes, and that drives those costs down that go with it. And it's the same thing for you. It's like if you've got florists who only want stem length, but yet you've got shorter stems. I mean, sometimes it's a benefit to say, listen, I've got this whole other crop of, grade B anemones, and it's a beautiful flower, and then somebody can find a use for it. I think that's really great. I know on Rooted, Amelia, that a lot of times when, well, I don't know, this kind of is getting in, I think, to the new features of this year. So I don't know if this was on it last year or not, but I know that a lot of times when you have showed sort of what recommended pricing was, and not, I'm not saying that correctly, but you had like, when you had like a range, I think last year, and I think you've improved that a lot this year. But did it always have like a stem length on it, or like a suggested average what that price should be, or is that just what I had a sneak peek of and as part of the new feature?
You get a sneak peek on the new features. We never recommend prices. That's not something that we ever do. Growers are always in control of their own pricing. We are never there to say this is how you should price products. That's not our job. You know your business, you know your market, you know your product better than anybody else does.
Sure.
And so it's really on the grower to make decisions around that. The pricing tool that we did build is unlike anything that's out there in the market, and I think is something that's just really a game changer for small farms, to really gain transparency on those market prices. And you spoke about this a little bit before, just kind of what will the market bear, and this is your lens into that. This is your lens into what will the market bear for these flowers. And you talked about it earlier on your podcast with Kimby about kind of seeking out different pricing sources to help guide some of that decision making, and like go and talk to your wholesaler and seek out a price list from another wholesaler. I know USDA publishes data, and they try to get information up there that's helpful, but also it can be really generic and just not very specific. It can be, sometimes they just say, long stems, or sometimes they'll just say, there's high supply, or, very, very, relatively unhelpful information as we as growers are trying to price our
Right.
product and say, well, but what should the delphinium be? And that's where we're trying to step in and add a little bit more visibility for farms, is say, we now are in this position where we've been at this for several years and accumulating a whole lot of data. How do we take that and turn it into something that has utility for you as farmers and gives you a window into those actual distributions of pricing. And so, there is a spectrum. There is not ever, for any product ever, there is no one right price for a flower. There's so many variables to that. We talked about stem length. So, if you're talking about anemones and you've got your first cuts versus your third cuts, those should be priced differently. If you're talking about zinnias and you've got a grower who's bringing in, nicely harvested but 12-inch stems, those are not the same product or price as your 16 or 18-inch stems for the same zinnias. Those are two different products with two different prices. And I think that's where we're trying to give you some visibility. So this tool is meant to give you, you can compare years. You can look at 2021 to 2022. As sales pick up in 2023, you'll see that on there. And you're going to be able to watch what's happening, because prices shift, and they should shift, and they should not remain static from one season to the next for a decade. That's not an appropriate pricing strategy. Just like, prices are changing on your everyday staples at the grocery store, your prices are changing on your flowers too, and they should be. So that's what the tool is we're giving you, a sense of what is the pricing distribution. So show me the spread of the prices, show me where most of the sales are happening, and then give me the context for how I should be thinking about my product. And so, if it's typically, we're seeing, the middle 50% of sales. So most sales are happening between $1 and $1.20 a stem. I'll just pull out Bennery's Giant as an example. Let's just say that that's the price. I don't actually know for sure. I don't have that one in my brain, but let's just say that's the price range that we see most sales happening.
Right.
We're going to give you the context to say, we also expect within this range that you'd be, most harvests are running between 14 and 18-inch stems. And so if you're way below that, it should help you to kind of understand where your prices may fall relative, and just the same if you're way higher, if you've got those 18-inch stems and your zinnias are gorgeous and enormous, you should feel comfortable pricing those appropriately. That should not be priced at the bottom end of the range. So this is just meant to give you kind of a lens into what is the market bearing right now? What does it look like over the last few years? How has it shifted? Has it shifted? And where do I feel like I'm falling, given what I'm seeing out there?
Sure. So this new tool, it's live already, correct?
It is. Yep. It's live
So,
already.
so if you already are a member of Rooted Farmers, then you already have that? Is that already part of your package that you already?
So we have two different tiers that you can join at. We have our essentials tier, and then we also have our pro tier. And we have those for both individual farms and then collectives as well. And so our essentials tier is kind of our entry level tier, and you've got everything that you need there to set up your store and start selling. We've got lots of analytics in there, but the pricing tool itself is part of that pro tier. And so that is the bumped up subscription level there to step in. Yeah.
Okay. And so with that, I'm curious, like, a lot of times, I know we just released an episode with Emily Von Trapp, and I'm thinking about, you have a greenhouse and you have the operations and you have that, and you have forced tulips that are being, that might have more input versus field grown tulips, which would have less inputs probably. And because of that, and I don't know if does this break down, because you mentioned season, that's what made me think about this. Like tulip season, I think of as being field grown tulips as opposed to forced tulips. Is there a distinction between that? I mean, that might be something for the future, but I'm just curious for people to know kind of that difference based on input.
So there is not a tool for that right now. I think it's a great idea for the future. So part of how we built this was to team up with some university partners that we have and some agricultural economists to say, here's our data, here's what we have, and we would like to create a tool that helps our farmers understand what the market pricing looks like on these products. And so this is really the result of years of work, years of building and rebuilding and getting feedback and iterating. But
What
the
what
biggest,
what do you mean by rebuilding?
when we build it, we sit around and we are playing with it first. So before we ever put something out there for any of you to see, we are building it, we are testing it. We're saying, do we like this? We're putting it in front of some of our farms. We're saying, do you like this? What do you think? And we will collect that feedback before we ever put something out there for people to actually
Right.
use in real life. We have a very rigorous testing process, but particularly with something like this, where we have the potential to inform how people are pricing. We want to be really, really careful that we are putting something that is representative, that is statistically significant. In other words, if we had data from one grower selling one bunch of tulips in Iowa, and that's all we had, would it be appropriate for us to share that with you and say, this is what prices look like for this product? No, of course not. That would be showing you just one data point for one person selling one bunch. And so really pushing that threshold up so that we're saying we don't want to show people anything until we feel like we have a representative sample of data from a general population of producers within Rooted that feels like it is it's representative of the market. And if it doesn't feel like that, we're not going to put it out there. So that's my long answer to your question about season differentiation, is that if we were to look at teeny tiny little microclimates and then try to pull in supply, we would be dialing down to these very minuscule
Right.
data sets that would no longer be statistically significant, and they wouldn't be helpful. So we want to really make sure that that is how we're framing the data whenever we put it out in front of large groups of people.
No, and I appreciate that. I really do, because what people don't realize, and they should, because being in our wonderful social media world now, we if there's is ever a time in history to realize the importance of the snapshot, that sometimes snapshots are very deceiving, and it's not until you see the whole film or the whole production or what goes behind it that you understand the weight behind the data. And so I can totally appreciate the fact that you are trying to create something that is not only useful but accurate and substantial enough that you can put some faith into it, because not only is it based on this block of information, but it's a continually growing block of information, which only makes the data more accurate.
Yeah.
And so that was, yeah. I mean, I just feel like that's so needed. I mean, I know that for years there have been, and you mentioned a couple of those things that have been out there to kind of help with pricing, but it feels like it's such this little narrow snapshot
Yeah.
of whatever the bulb price was for something that time that year, and then the assumption of what that market value is, and then it changes constantly, because amaryllis bulbs have a crop failure or something, and then all of a sudden the price on them goes sky high. And I mean, you have to be able to adapt, and I know that that's part of the whole picture. But my point is having this data to base this on is real information, and it's live information, and it's really exciting, I think, because I think it's going to help a lot of farmers be more confident in what they charge.
It's also market information. We are not showing you list prices of product. We're showing you purchase prices of product. So it's the actual prices that flowers traded on, not what somebody asked for them. We're only showing out data that is market driven data. And that's really helpful because that, again, that speaks to your question of what will the market bear on these products.
Sure. That's awesome. Well, and I feel like, I know from things I've noticed in the past, but earlier when I was talking with Kimby, I know that we were talking about trends and how that's influencing her buying. With all the information you have, do you see like maybe trends that in 2022 are different or things we should be expecting in 2023? I know it's not a crystal ball, but I mean, just still things that I'm just curious what insight you guys have from all of that.
We do see trends. I think from a pricing perspective, we saw prices go up in 2022, which hopefully is not a surprise for anybody. Hopefully,
Should be.
hopefully you, or if you're listening, you increased your prices in 2022, because we especially going into the year, I think we had a lot of concerns around gas shortages and prices of fuel were going way up, and there was still a lot of supply chain disruption that we were seeing with shipments coming in, and so I think for 2022, we generally saw somewhere between 6 and 8% across the board price increases on flowers. Now, again, there's a lot of granular data there that I'm totally glancing over by just throwing that number out there. Your stem length, all the variables that really drive your pricing. I think what was interesting for us is we did see in 2022 those crops that were relatively more expensive to produce. So tulips, just thinking about the freight costs that are bringing, that you're absorbing as a producer, bringing in the bulbs and how that was going up. And we did see that. So while we saw this kind of 6 to 8% increase, we saw a much higher increase for things like tulips, which is good because it means that or it suggests that producers are factoring in those cost increases that they are having to absorb into the prices and then passing those down the line to their buyers. And the buyers are then passing those on to their customers, and that's where inflation comes from. But this is something that we are seeing in the data that I think is reassuring to us that producers are using that to drive their prices too.
Yeah. Well, I feel like a lot of times too, people, they don't, they are confused on what the market will bear. And they're also, a lot of times it either comes from a mindset place or confidence place or knowing that maybe you wouldn't spend that much money on those flowers. Well, maybe we would, but I'm just saying, like a lot of people might not. And because of that, you get negative input and you just don't feel confident. But when you see this kind of data, I think it's really changing. Kimby, I'm curious when you see this kind of, because I know you've seen it, you've not really, because it's just a new release. Do you feel like are your other growers, and again, I know I'm putting you on the spot, so forgive me, but do you feel like everybody, I mean, are they excited about this new feature, or is everybody curious how it might change what they do this year?
I haven't talked about it too much within the collective yet, but just myself looking at it has been, it's just been really interesting. I just kind of glanced at a few flowers that I'll be getting ready to be selling here soon. It's February, so I'm kind of looking at anemones and ranunculus and stock and snapdragons, and so it was nice to kind of look at those specific things, going, okay, well, I know what I charged last year, and then just kind of going, oh, I'm in the 50 percentile range, I'm doing okay, or oh, I'm a little bit low on that, or so I know specifically, like my stock, I wasn't charging enough for stock. So I'm like, oh, I need to charge more for stock. And so it's really it's confirming, because it's also I know that like I really like my stock and it does a really good job. And so then it's going, okay, well, I can charge a little bit more for that and be totally within the range that people are doing. And not that it has to be in that range necessarily, because Amelia already talked about like the different your quality of your product, and so that does affect the price. But it's also really handy to know what people like, what the market is doing overall, in a big picture, and going, oh, well, like there's a big difference between $1 a stem or $1.25 stem or whatever. I don't remember the exact numbers for stock, but I do know that it was like, oh, I can totally charge more for that, going forward, and that was really handy. And also knowing my anemones, like I was pretty much like spot on. I was just like, oh, that's kind of handy to know too. And then I can go, oh, well, if I have really nice anemones this year, I can charge more than that because that was a median, that was a middle. And so the market is flexible there. I have a little bit of wiggle room.
Well, that's exciting because I think that, again, hearing your excitement at the fact that, gosh, well, I hear two things. One, I can charge more. I mean, who's not excited about that, right? I mean, the florists are cringing because I don't want to pay more. But the thing about it is everything about most local product, if it's good quality, there's only upside to having superior product, I believe. And so that's a hard sometimes pill for us people reselling things to swallow. But I know that what I hear in your voice, that besides, whatever with the price, is confidence. Like, I know that I can do this because I'm seeing this, and this information gave you confidence to know, okay, I am still within the range, even charging this higher price of the average of all the data. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's a huge thing. I mean, I don't want to glance over that because I feel like confidence is one of those things, especially, okay, so I just know I've experienced this when you're a flower farmer and you're out there and you sometimes the mind is a tricky thing when you're out there weeding for hours on end, or fertilize, whatever it is you're doing, planting seeds, potting things up, whatever. I mean, sometimes you can start to kind of question some things, and just having reliable information and the confidence that can come with that reliable information. I mean, it's like that's just such a deal. I mean, it's such a, I don't know. It's just a boost, and seeing the expression on your face as you were saying it, I could tell, and I know people who are listening to this can't see it, but I just didn't want it to go by without a mention. So
And I think that circles back to your initial thought there, Scott, when we first started talking, was just around all of the different hats that growers have to wear, and having to be an expert in market pricing on every single product that you're selling, especially when as growers, we might have 100, 200, 400, 600 different cultivars that we are producing over the course of a season. You got to be the expert in every single one of those and do all of the research on every single price. Now we're just kind of putting it in front of you so that it's right at your fingertips rather than having to go out there. So it's just one more thing that you can kind of cross off your list.
sure. Well, I think that's really exciting, and I know, for those of you that are listening, I know that in the next coming weeks we're going to sit down and create a new YouTube tutorial showing all of these new features, and we'll be letting everyone know via email and everything just when that releases, because I know sometimes just seeing the benefit is huge. When hearing it, sometimes it's hard to visualize what we've all seen already. I always like to end on my advice question, and I already tortured Kimby once, so Amelia, it's your turn. And I do want to also say that for our listeners, I know that we have a discount code, and I'm going to kind of give you a way out there a little bit if you want to mention all that too. So
Yes, you do have a discount code. I'll give you that first. It's TFP. I'm reading it so I get it right. TFP 23, and that is for $75 off of your annual subscription, for either the essentials or the pro tier. So you can use that for either one. And so again, that's TFP23, and I'm sure you'll post that in the show notes too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
As for the advice, I think it's just try not to doubt yourself too much. I think we imposter syndrome is real, and so many of us struggle through that. And it's I think especially pervasive in farming, where we are like isolated out there all the time, and so we're just doing this sort of like second guessing constantly in our heads. But I can say that it, from our perspective, we get to work with so many growers. We're working with hundreds of you all the time. Like, you've got this. You can figure this out. You can work through it. And if you trip and fall, you'll just pick yourself right back up again and keep going. And so I think it's just to give yourself a little bit more credit than you probably are would be my my words for tonight.
Well, I love that a lot. So again, thank you guys so much for being on the Flower Podcast. Thank you, Amelia. Thank you, Kimby. And it's been a real pleasure and treat. And I can't wait to see what 2023 brings for all of our farmers and for rooted farmers. So thank you guys.
Well, thank you so much, Scott, for having us. It's always fun chatting.